The Abyssal Call. The ocean was a vast, endless chasm that swallowed sound, light, time, and truth. It stretched out beneath him in layered infinities, darker than the void between stars, colder than the grave of creation. From the deck of his weather-beaten research vessel, the Vigilance, Grayson Kernoff watched the surface churn, slow, gray, and indifferent. Ice floes drifted like broken thoughts. The Arctic sky hung low and heavy, a lid on a forgotten tomb. It was silent out here, save for the groan of shifting hull plates and the occasional moan of wind as it whipped his hair around. He gripped the salt-crusted railing with gloved hands. His breath clouded in front of him. His eyes, rimmed with fatigue, scanned the nothingness ahead, searching for what couldn't be seen, but must be there. Beneath him lay the seemingly boundless expanse of water, and somewhere down in the cold black, hidden in sediment and shadows, was the wreck. He could feel it, hear it. Grayson had often wondered if the ocean was not merely a parallel to space, but akin, a dark sibling. Both were incomprehensible realms, unlit and eternal. But where space was sterile and silent, the sea was alive. It breathed in a way you couldn't hear, moved in ways you couldn't follow, and watched with eyes you couldn't see. People called the deep sea unexplored. He knew better. It was not that man couldn't explore it. It was that man was not meant to. The clawing of Earth's gravity and vacuum of space seemed to offer less resistance than the ocean's depths to human exploration. That thought made him shudder. Those same people had laughed at him. Years of ridicule, of professional exile, of being dismissed as a crackpot romantic, chasing ghosts and lost cities through old sea logs and forgotten manifestos. Even those who had once respected his Arctic navigation research turned their backs once he began to speak, quietly at first, about the Isle Sirenia, a merchant scientific vessel lost in 1897, declared missing with all hands after venturing north under secret orders from a private collector in Edinburgh. The captain's log mentioned only vague intentions to retrieve a relic, a tome of unknown ancient origins said to have been locked within a vault that predated all known maps. It was priceless, if it ever existed. Years of digging through archives, bribing museum staff, decoding ancient nautical records had been worth losing his crew, his friends. He was certain, this time, he had found it. A glint of bitter wind needled across his face. He reached up and adjusted his mask. It was time. He turned from the sea, the endless black mirror, and stepped toward the dive platform. Pressurized valves hissed, his movements stiff from the bulky dry suit as he checked backup tanks, lights, and gauges. He had done this 100 times, but this time felt different. No one else would dare dive alone in these waters, but no one else had heard the call. He sat on the edge, legs dangling over murky nothingness, and stared down once more. The surface looked calm, peaceful, but he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Grayson leaned forward and fell into the abyss. The descent felt slower than it was. Grayson's body dropped steadily into the black, his limbs weightless in the near-freezing water. Above him, the surface had already vanished, swallowed by silt and depth. Only the beam from his headlamp cut through the darkness now, a narrow blade of sterile light in a void older than time. The ocean pressed against him, not violently, but with patient inevitability. He checked his instruments, oxygen levels, depth readings, temperature, all still optimal. But even these comforts felt faint now, fragile, distant. Floating ever downward, he passed through a curtain of drifting particulates, a cloud of tiny organic matter floating like cosmic dust. Plankton, maybe, or just the disintegrated remains of things that didn't survive this harsh environment. His breathing was slow and controlled, but his heart thrummed just beneath the calm. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was anticipation. It was obsession wrapped in certainty. The sonar chimed. A low echo bounced back, something large below. He angled his body down and aimed his light. Slowly, shadows took shape in the murk. A jagged silhouette loomed ahead. Then, details. The curve of a hull, splintered beams, an iron-ribbed spine jutting from the seafloor like the remains of a carcass. His pulse spiked. It was the Isle Sirenia. 2 long decades of research, cross-referenced logs, whispers of a lost tome from lands older than empires. And here it was. His eyes wide in disbelief. "It's her," he bubbled out, though no one could hear. He drifted closer. The ship was split open, its hull torn wide down the middle. But it wasn't time that had destroyed it. The wood hadn't simply eroded or splintered. It had been crushed, folded inward like paper. Deep gouges along the broken ribs of the hull. Strangulation marks. Something grabbed this ship. Something massive. Grayson floated beside it in silence, eyes scanning every inch. His light swept lower, and that's when he saw them. The seafloor wasn't just sand and rock. Beneath the sediment, rectangular forms jutted upward, like pieces of buildings long buried. Steps, pillars, carved blocks, and stone platforms lay in disarray. And engraved on many of the surfaces were symbols, not letters, not even runes. These were jagged angular marks with impossible curves, inscribed too deep and too straight to be eroded by time. He blinked. Something shimmered at the edge of his vision, a gentle warping, a nausea that prickled behind his eyes. He turned away, disoriented, and took a deep breath. The inside of his helmet felt too warm. "Get a grip," he urged himself. Then, movement, a soft flicker in the dark behind him. His gut clenched. He turned, swinging the headlamp beam across the wreck, and beyond it, there, at the edge of visibility, the edge of a cliff that sloped downward into oblivion, something stirred. The ocean itself rippled. It recoiled. A shape rose from the trench, impossibly large, darker somehow than the depths below it. Tentacles as thick as telephone poles began to uncoil in slow, balletic motion. Grayson froze, watching in paralyzed awe as one of the limbs curled upward, revealing iridescent markings along its length. Shifting, bioluminescent glyphs, blinking in a language no mind should know. It was the size of a house. No, larger. A creature not meant for human perception. No eyes, no mouth. Just snaking sucker-lined arms grasping for something. It hadn't seen him yet, if it even could see. Or maybe it had, and simply hadn't decided what to do. He didn't wait to find out. Grayson turned and kicked hard, propulsion unit flaring to life. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The shipwreck yawned before him. The tear in the hull, like a wound in reality, called to him. He reached it in seconds, adrenaline sharpening every movement, just as he passed through the broken beams, just as the dark behind him pulsed with movement. Everything changed. The cold vanished. So did the water, the weight of the ocean, The hiss of oxygen, the press of his suit, all gone. He stumbled forward onto solid wooden planks, his boots thudding softly against the dry floor. Lanterns swayed gently above him, casting amber halos across the interior of a pristine ship's hold. He was breathing air now. Warm, salted air that smelled faintly of oil and old rope. His mind reeled. His suit was gone, his gear, his mask, all vanished. He looked down. He wore a coarse linen shirt, rough wool trousers, and worn boots. His hands were bare, calloused, weathered, like those of a sailor from another time. And above him, the Isle Sirenia creaked and groaned, not as wreckage, but as a ship adrift. A heartbeat passed, then another, and then Grayson whispered, "What the hell?" He had been descending, fleeing a creature that should not exist, and now, where was he? The door to the upper deck stood just ahead. He approached it cautiously and climbed the narrow ladder, his body still half expecting the drag of water or the failure of oxygen. Instead, he emerged into fog. Thick gray-white mist choked the entire deck. He could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The fog glowed faintly with ambient light, but there was no sign of the sun or sky. No horizon, just pale, featureless void above and around him. The ship rocked gently, but the sea was silent. Grayson stepped forward, boots thudding against the timbers. Ropes hung neatly coiled beside cleats. The sails were furled tight. Every detail was in place, but there was no sign of crew, no voices, no laughter or work. The ship was perfectly ready and utterly still. He called out, "Hello?" Only his voice answered, dampened and swallowed by the fog. The air was still. No wind, not even the scent of salt spray. He walked the length of the deck, his footsteps muted. His heart thudded loud in his chest. At the ship's prow he paused, peering into the mist. Shapes seemed to form within it, like the silhouettes of other ships drifting nearby. But when he focused on them, they dissolved. His fingers clenched the rail. The fog pressed around him, dense and heavy. He felt as if something in it were watching. Another breath, and then the pain hit. A white-hot spike behind his eyes sent him to his knees. He gasped, grabbing his temples as his vision shattered. Images. A burning sky. Black waves cresting high over a crumbling city. Figures screamed and ran, robes trailing in fire, vanishing in torrents of water and ash. Above it all, a shape, formless and immense. Tentacles stretching across the firmament like roots through a dying earth. Eyes. So many eyes. They opened across the sky itself, blinking, watching him. Grayson screamed, or thought he did. He came back on the deck, breath ragged, forehead slick with cold sweat. The pain faded slowly, but the visions lingered like after-images on his soul. Shuddering, he pulled himself to his feet and turned from the rail. The fog had closed in tighter now, pressing against his skin like wet cloth. He knew he wouldn't find anything else above deck. Whatever was happening to him, whatever this place was, the answers, if any existed, would be below. He headed toward the nearest hatch, hand trembling on the cold iron ring, and descended back into the darkness of the ship's bowels. The stairs groaned under Grayson's boots as he descended, one hand trailing the damp rail. Lanterns flickered along the corridor walls, casting amber halos that danced over the planks. The deeper he went, the thicker the air became, not just humid, but heavy. Everything was still. No damage, no corrosion. The ship's lower decks looked as though the crew had just stepped out moments ago. Hammocks swayed ever so slightly. Folded garments lay neatly beside sleeping rolls. A pipe still rested in an ashtray. But there was no one. Every inch of his skin crawled with the certainty that he was being watched, not from behind or ahead, but from the walls, from the very space he occupied. Something was in the ship, or it was the ship. He turned and caught a flicker of motion just at the edge of the lantern's glow, a shadow that bent the light strangely. It vanished as he focused on it. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. He pressed on. As he passed through narrow doorways, strange feelings surged through him. He paused and rested his hand against the wall. Suddenly, he wasn't himself. The sea lashed across the deck. Crewmen barked orders nearby, familiar voices he hadn't heard in a century. Then laughter, coarse, joyous. He was clinking glasses with bearded men in the galley, the scent of brandy and sweat in the air. Then, a scraping sound along the hull. Silence in the dark. A low boom, something massive brushing the ship like a fist about to clench. He tore his hand back from the wall, gasping. Was he hallucinating? These weren't dreams, more like memories. He was slipping. Deeper. A heavy wooden door marked with the captain's crest loomed at the end of the corridor. Grayson opened it slowly. Inside, dust had settled on every surface, except one. A broad, oil-stained map lay spread across the desk, held in place by a brass compass. His eyes locked on the red X marked near the pole. The coordinates were exact, the very location he had dived into hours, or lifetimes, ago. A journal lay beside the map, leather cover worn from use. He opened it carefully. Ink scrolls twisted across yellowed pages. We are nearly there. The book sings from below. Not in words, but in visions. I see them when I close my eyes. The crew no longer sleeps. They watch the fog as if they'll will the wind to return. They keep telling me it's too deep, but we came all this way. I must find it. If I don't make it, others will follow. It's in my blood. We always hear the call. Grayson froze at the signature at the bottom of the page. Captain Elias Kernoff, his great-grandfather. All this time, he had assumed Elias was merely a crew member. Perhaps his family had attempted to bury any memory of the obsession that had ended Elias's life. And now, so many years later, Grayson stood in his place, reading the final words written by the man whose blood still echoed in his veins. The desk drawer opened with a groan. Inside was a flintlock pistol, resting on black velvet. It gleamed as if recently polished. Grayson picked it up. It was heavier than he expected, real, oiled, functional. He looked up and froze. A tarnished brass mirror on the wall caught his reflection, but it wasn't him. For a flicker, just a breath, he wore a captain's coat, high collar, brass buttons. A face aged by frost and burdens stared back, hollow eyes, salted beard, a man long dead. Then it was gone. His own face returned, pale, sweating. He backed out of the room. The hallway had changed. It was longer now, wider. The lanterns flickered blue. The wood beneath his boots had turned slick. No, it was stone. Cold, damp stone that glistened with condensation. The grain of the ship's walls melted into rough carved slabs. Cracks filled with lichen, etched symbols began to emerge. Spirals, claws, concentric circles filled with eyes. The air was colder, the light dimmer. Time seemed to stop. He walked on. The path tilted subtly, as if leading downward. His body moved on its own, like a dream where you're only watching yourself move. The carvings on the walls became more intricate the deeper he looked, tentacles twisting into stars, a sun splitting open like an eye, and the feeling returned of being watched, being welcomed. The corridor narrowed as Grayson descended. The walls pressed in. Moisture clung to the stone, dripping slowly from above, echoing like ticking seconds in a countdown to an unknown end. The symbols etched along the walls pulsed faintly with an unearthly light. He had stopped trusting the space around him to follow any rules, paths turning back on themselves but never meeting, stone arches that floated above, geometry shifted like a dream. Then he saw an end to the tunnels, a dark doorway. The corridor spilled into a cavernous chamber. It was circular, surrounded by titanic pillars that curved inward like the ribs of a leviathan. The ceiling was lost in shadow. There was no natural light, just stone pillars with glowing runes casting eerie shadows in the mist. And at the far end, towering over everything, was a colossal statue. It loomed at least 100 feet high. Vaguely humanoid, tentacles unfurled from its back and sides, some reaching toward the ground, others wrapping the pillars or disappearing into the void above. Its head was a confusing mass of cavities, mouths or eyes or neither. The surface of the statue writhed when he didn't look directly at it, like oil roiling beneath stone. Grayson stepped past a pillar, and suddenly a figure stood before him. He hadn't heard it, hadn't seen it approach, just there. Suddenly, reflex overtook thought. The flintlock fired with a sharp, thunderous crack. The bullet struck the man's chest, and he fell without a sound. As he hit the stone floor, his body shattered, splitting like a dry husk. A burst of dust and tattered cloth scattered across the ground, leaving behind nothing but an empty, brittle heap. Grayson's breath trembled out of him. The man had been long dead, mummified in place. Who was he? Lantern raised, he took a cautious step forward and scanned the room. More shapes emerged from the gloom, a dozen figures arranged in a half-circle around a jagged stone altar, kneeling. Each wore the remnants of 19th century seaman's garb. Some were little more than skeletons, their flesh long rotted away. Others were eerily preserved, leathery skin stretched tight over hollow cheeks, hands still clasped in prayer or raised worship. Their faces were frozen in different expressions: agony, rapture, madness. All of them stared upward, toward the statue's face. Their eyes were still open. Grayson passed between them, lantern flickering wildly. One held a Bible open in his lap, the pages rotted through and blackened. Another had driven a dagger through his own sternum, and the expression on his face was not pain, but peace. None of them moved, and yet the air pulsed with their presence. Grayson's gaze rose to the statue, unsure and yet compelled. At first he could take in only its scale, the immensity, the way it absorbed space around it. Something in it watched him back. His knees buckled, pain lanced through his skull. The vision came. He stood not in the temple, but on the high cliffs of an alien world. A city stretched before him, an architectural impossibility of smooth stone towers and metallic veins pulsing with blue light. A blood-red moon loomed above, and the stars around it swirled like they were circling a drain in the sky. Figures, inhuman, tall, draped in robes, ran through the streets in panic. The sea rose. From the edge of the black ocean, a wall of water and tentacles climbed toward the city. Towering tendrils lashed through the skyline, crumbling spires like they were made of paper. The earth split beneath his feet. Fire fell from the heavens. Screams, the sound of something worse than death, as if existence itself were being unmade. And behind the wave, barely visible, a shape too vast for a mortal mind to grasp. Not a creature, not even a god. Like seeing behind the curtain of reality. It blotted out the sky, not by presence, but by implication. Grayson's heart failed him. The wave struck, and he was back. He gasped for air, body slick with sweat. He was on his knees before the altar, chest heaving. The room swam, his lantern flickered. The statue loomed, but now it seemed closer, and upon the altar before him lay a book. It was massive, bound in leathery hide that shifted when his eyes moved across it. No title, no clasp. The cover bore strange etchings, not drawn or carved, but grown into the surface like scar tissue. It pulsed faintly, matching his own heartbeat. Grayson rose, slowly. He stepped forward. The kneeling figures did not move, but he felt them behind him, each one watching, waiting. The tome radiated a kind of gravity, not physical, but spiritual, like it had waited for him, specifically, like it knew him, called to him. He reached out, trembling slightly. All the fear he'd felt before was a whisper now, like a childhood memory of pain, dulled by distance. He let his hand fall. The cover writhed faintly beneath his fingers, warm, textured like stretched skin. It pulsed once, as if in greeting. The air shifted. A hum built from the floor of the altar up into his bones. The sound wasn't heard, it was felt. A pressure inside his skull, vibrating like the tuning of something ancient. He opened the book. The pages whispered as they turned. Thin, not like paper, nor fabric, nor leather, but something in between. They shimmered faintly with ink that flowed and reformed with every glance. The glyphs writhed when he looked at them, twisting in ways language was never meant to. He could not read the words, but understanding filled his mind. All his senses began to dull as the humming grew in intensity. He was left with only his thoughts. The cavern melted away to nothing. Void. He floated in a darkness deeper than the ocean, deeper than death. There was no ground, no temperature, no gravity. He wasn't breathing. His body may not have even existed, but he was still aware. And then he sensed it. It had always been there, waiting just outside perception, like a storm building beneath the skin of the world. Its arrival wasn't announced. Everything that is simply became its body. Tentacles that stretched beyond physics waved in rhythms too complex to decipher. Eyes blinked across surfaces that weren't surfaces. Limbs coiled into limbs that weren't connected to anything. It didn't speak in words, but in thought, memory, and the awful weight of understanding. He knew its names, though it never gave them. The Hungerer, Shapeless Doom, Tide of Unbeing. It enveloped him, folding him inside itself, yet never touching him. It had always known him. Then the visions came, not dreams, not metaphor, truth. He saw Elias Kernov descending alone into the sea, suspended beneath the surface by a fraying lifeline. His suit was crude, brass helmet bolted shut, a single hose trailing upward to the ship above. Air hissed faintly through it. He never stood a chance against the crushing dark. The ancient stone arch lay just ahead. His destination. The threshold. The book waited. But the pressure was too great. A crack split the glass of his helmet. Grayson saw him twist, clutching at the hose, but the small window burst inwards. Air escaping in a stream of bubbles as seawater surged into the suit. Elias convulsed silently, then went still. He drifted down, dead at the doorstep of his destiny. Something in the dark noticed. The ocean pulsed. A sudden presence stirred. Immense. Furious. Tentacles curled from the depths, rising like black smoke. The Leviathan ascended. High above, still whole and unaware, the Isle Serenia waited its doom. Then Grayson saw more. Civilizations before men. Cities drowned beneath oceans and erased from time. Cultures that worshipped the entity, then denied it, then paid for forgetting. Walls of flame, sky-splitting storms, seas turned to boiling steam. He saw the tome passed hand to hand, sung into minds through dreams, carried by those who heard the call. Most ending in madness and death, but the book remained. Each civilization that failed to prepare the way was unmade. The voice, if it could be called that, filled him again. Your blood has returned. He failed. You have not. You have seen what happens to those who deny me. Pave the way for my coming. Spread the word of the void. Open the door and let me in. Grayson felt himself dissolve. His name, his identity, even his memories began to thin out like mist. He was not a man anymore. He was a tool, a vessel for awakening. And he accepted, not with joy, not with terror, but with stillness. The fear was gone. The questions didn't matter. He belonged now to something endless. He opened his eyes. The cold air struck his face. He was standing on the deck of the Vigilance, his boat. The sea around him was as still as oil. No wind, no stars, just a blank canopy above, deep charcoal and indifferent. The tome rested in his arms, warm and weighty. He looked down at it with calm reverence. And when he raised his head again, something in his eyes had changed. They were dark as the sky and bottomless as the sea. Grayson took a deep breath, the last he would ever take as a man alone, and said softly, "Let's begin."